think we've been muted on Zoom.
There we go. Okay, sorry, apologies. We have unmuted and added the video. So I'll phrase that again. So I'm Sarah Korse, the Planning Building Director for Town Valley. And so we are here tonight to present information on 3 different draft amendments. So I'll help kick off the presentation, then pass it off to Brandon DeLucas, who's a consultant senior planner from Good City. And we'll walk through a brief overview of the amendments now. So the 3 zoning code amendments are being proposed kind of as a packaged update to our zoning code for the ADUs and JADUs, emergency shelters, and development indemnification. This meeting will be an opportunity to ask questions and also provide comments for the draft amendments. So again, we're here tonight for an informal study session. No vote will be taken. After today, the next step might be to address comments as needed and then return to the Planning Commission to potentially later in March for review and consideration. So if the Planning Commission recommends this to be approved by the Town Council, then we would present the draft amendments to Town Council for formal review and adoption. And I'd like to point out that this schedule is a general timeline for now. So a bit about why we're here and why we're doing the updates, and I'll let Brandon provide a little bit more detail later. But essentially for the ADU ordinance, we have direction from Council to implement the housing element, which the ADU and JAD ordinance is an implementation item of the housing element. We also have council direction to update the town's ADU ordinance regularly to comply with state law. So the nature of this ordinance is to follow this direction, which no direction for like an expanded scope has been given, at least not at this time. For the emergency shelters and development indemnification ordinances, we've received council direction to do regular code updates to comply with state law and also to comply with best practices. And so at this point, I'd like to pass it off to Brandon to speak more to this and provide more information.
Right. Good evening, Commission. Brandon DeLucas. So to kind of go over the ADU ordinance, what are we kind of proposing at this time? So we are proposing to rescind the existing standards for ADU and JADUs. That's in Chapter 1836040. And then we're creating a standalone chapter for ADUs and accessory dwelling units or junior accessory dwelling units. This is just based off best practices. The state loves to change ADU law. And instead of us having to go back into our main ordinance and constantly make the tweaks, it's easier just to have one set aside chapter for it. It also makes it easier for people to find the standards. The existing standards are hidden in our standards for uses in all districts and then accessories, and it's way down at the bottom. So there were some people that got lost just, working with people to guide them through the process. So that's the intent of creating the new chapter, but also to comply with the state law changes. So some background, the state is looking to remove barriers, streamline approvals, and increase capacity of housing units. Currently, our standards are non-compliant. We last updated our ADU ordinance in 2021. Since then, there have been 12 bills that have been passed. I think 4 to 5 last year alone. Attachment 3 kind of had a summary of all those bills. And so we are trying to catch up and implement all of those. We also, in 2023, received an HCD non-compliant letter, just saying, hey, we're not compliant, you need to make edits. But again, there also has been more bills that have been passed with that. Additionally, with some of those bills, HCD has been granted new authority to interpret and implement the ADU law. So that is a unique situation where HCD's guidebook can be considered as kind of part of the law. And that is the legislature's intent, is to give HCD the right to interpret. So a lot of our edits are looking at not only the law, but also HCD's handbook and kind of their guidance. We also sat down and they have a Excel spreadsheet with every ordinance and technical assistance letter they've sent out to any and all jurisdictions. So staff has been reviewing those and looking at where HCD has called out other cities. Hey, this is not compliant and this is why. So in evaluating all that, that is what has kind of drafted our proposed ordinance. So just some background on kind of our ADU and JADU trends. You can see on the screen here in 2021, we had 6 ADUs. We kind of stayed consistent for 2022. 23 and 24, we did see an increase up to 11 ADUs. These are for permits that were issued. So they were issued in those years. Last year, we did see a slight drop, but currently we actually have 13 ADUs that are actively under review, 2 of which are actually ready to issue. We're just waiting on the applicant to come pick them up. Within that number, we did not have any ADUs that used our existing like bonus going up to the 1,500 square feet. Most of them were at the 800 with a couple at the 1,200. And when I say a couple, I'm 3 of those ADUs were at the 1,200 square feet. Almost everything else was 800 or less with a couple 900s mixed in there. And that's just looking over, and I just ran those numbers again right before the meeting, just to make sure I had the most accurate. And so that's where we're seeing a lot of them kind of not utilize our bonus. Just kind of for some context, there also has been changes to SB 9 state law, which allows for additional units, up to 4 units on a single family property. That has been streamlined actually. And so a lot of applicants are actually looking to utilize that because so SB 9 is similar to ADU. It's 4-foot side and rear setbacks, but they have to only comply with the underlying zoning district requirements, objective requirements. So for example, we have AMFA. So we restrict, the amount of habitable space you can build on a site that's based off our AMFA. For the people that wanted larger ADUs going towards that 1,500, they actually try to make use of that law instead of ADU law, because ADU law and how our ordinance currently reads is a little more restrictive. SB 9 is ministerial. We cannot have any public hearing, so it doesn't go to ASCC, doesn't come to commission. And again, they're allowed the objective standards that we have in our underlying ordinance. So that's really why we haven't seen a lot of people make use of our existing bonus provisions. So to kind of go over what we're currently proposing, location is staying the same. A ADU is allowed in any residential district or with a site with a residential use. So if it's zoned open space and there's a house there, they still get ADUs. JADU is the same, where single family zones or sites with a single family use is still how it's applied. The maximum number of units has changed. So for single family, there's 2 units allowed. And this is where the underlined "and" was changed in state law. Before, you could have a conversion ADU or a new detached or attached ADU. State law changed and says "and." So you can new either as an attached ADU or detached ADU. Multifamily ADUs changed. The detached went from 2 to 8. And I think in between it also was 4. So it went 4, now it's 8. So again, they keep changing this on us. So it is now 8 detached units for a multifamily ADU. You can convert up to 25% of your existing units. So internal conversions is how that one works. JADUs, just clarifying, you're only allowed 1, and that's only for single family. Size limitations. The state law is silent on it, but how HCD has interpreted and issued their handbook for conversions, there is no size limitation. Somebody could have let's say they have a 4,000 square foot house. They want to convert 3,000 square feet of it under ADU law. That is permitted. However, we still can have our maximum size requirements for attached and detached, which currently we are proposing at 1,000. And then 500 is still consistent for the ADUs. Now setbacks. The state has clarified that the maximum minimum setback that we can apply to any and all ADUs is 4 feet. So even if we want to say, hey, we'll allow you up to 1,500 square feet, but you have to have a 10-foot setback, the state has clarified we cannot apply a 10-foot setback. The maximum minimum that we can do is 4 feet. If we can make it less than 4 feet, we can say you can have a 2 foot setback or a 3 foot setback, but 4 foot is the maximum that we can require. And that's a bit of a change over the recent years and has kind of become a lot stricter. So, and one thing to note is the state, and this is from a webinar with HCD last week, has clarified that in their eyes for ADU law, corner lots do not exist. Every lot has a front, then all the remaining are either side or rear. They do not consider a street side as a valid valid lot line. They consider that's just a side. So even if a lot, has a corner and the street goes around it, we will have to identify one as the front, and then the other one would be the side, and that would get 4 foot setbacks. The front setback, we can still ask for them to comply with whatever the underlying zoning district is, unless it would prohibit one of the minimum 800 square foot unit from applying. And that is how we currently have it written. Heights, they have changed the height requirements a little bit. Again, conversions, there is no height limit because you're converting existing space. So it's whatever the height that building has. JADUs, the height is the primary residence, again, because it's generally a conversion of an existing space. For attached ADUs, you're allowed 25 feet or the maximum height allowed in the district, whichever is lower. Most of our districts allow 28 feet, so they could have a 28-foot. For detached, you're allowed 16 feet. There's a possibility for 18 feet if you meet certain criteria. And then there is an additional provision that additional height could be allowed up to 2 feet. In addition, so for 16 and 18 would become 18 and 20 to allow for the roof pitch. So if somebody, instead of a flat roof, wants to have a hipped roof, we would have to account for that. Additionally, parking. How the state law is worded is we can apply parking, but it gives a bunch of exemptions saying you can't do it in these cases. In reviewing those cases, staff is not able to identify a situation where we could actually apply parking. So we are, it wasn't in the edits that were attached to this, but it is something staff is reviewing. We are just going to say no parking required for ADUs, just because, again, given those provisions, we can't trigger parking anyways. It would almost never apply. And then for JADUs, no parking applies. Additionally, if somebody does convert, like let's say a garage to either an ADU or JADU, we cannot require them to replace that parking. So that house would be non-compliant with our parking, but there's nothing we can do about that currently under state law. So some of the other standards we added. So for site improvements, this is just a catch-all category to accommodate. So for example, lighting, we regulate as a separate use. Grading is regulated separately, and depending on how much grading, it needs to come before the commission. We have to minimally allow, the 800 square foot units or the ADUs subject to one of the government code sections, the state exempt ADUs. Otherwise, all our other standards are apply. And that's what this standard is clarifying, is just, if you propose an ADU, we'll waive the requirements for, having the planning commission view for grading because we have to allow that ADU up to 800 square feet. But that's all you're getting. If you go 802 square feet, our standards apply. You'll have to come to planning commission for the site grading. If it's that trigger, or ASCC for that trigger. So that's how we're trying to implement our current standards when they can apply. Objective design standards, we've kept these really minimal and tried to align with the objective standards that we either already had in our code or we're already trying to apply to ADUs. So LRV is a great example. That's the light reflectivity value of colors. We are still applying those. Exterior lighting, we are still applying the standards within our municipal code for dark skies when we can. And then landscaping, just pointing to the plants list that we do have in our design standards as acceptable plantings. Additionally, we did add a requirement for separate address. So the current code allows it to be at the discretion of the property owner. And this is really coming from best practices. In a lot of other jurisdictions, particularly with fire, they want to know if there's a second address there, because when they enter a building, if there's an ADU attached, they don't know they can't get into that unit. So by having the second address, they know, hey, there's 2 units here. I might not be able to access it by going in one door. I had to find another way. It also helps with mail. It helps with utility services and things like that. So the best practice has been to require addresses, particularly for ADUs. JADUs, there has been some back and forth whether we require it for ADUs with an internal connection or not. And then utility connections. This is just clarifying, if you're going to have a detached ADU, we don't want you running your electrical line as a drop, above it. We really want it undergrounded. One thing to keep in mind, that these standards cannot apply to the state exempt ADUs. State exempt is we get the height, we get the size and the setbacks. That's it. We cannot dictate any other standards. And that's Government Code Section 66323. It lists out all the ADUs that we have to approve. Yep.
Brendan, let me interrupt you so that people know that Nicholas has arrived, having survived Super Bowl traffic. Thank you. Go ahead.
Of course. And there is some other standard language that has been added concerning how you can rent an ADU. An ADU, if it's going to be offered for rent, it can't be a short-term rental. It does have to be more than 30 days. We're implementing the state law requirement for owner occupancy for a JADU. So if a JADU is built and does not have its own bathroom, the property owner has to live in one of the units. So either the AD or the JADU or the main house. If it does have its own bathroom, both are fully rentable. The owner does not have to live on site. And that is just consistent with the state law requirements. There's also requirements in there for the conveyance. You can't sell the ADU separately or the JADU. And it's addressing items that are in state law that HCD has asked us to. Now moving over to the emergency shelters. The emergency shelter edit is just to implement Housing Element Program 8.3, which is trying to get us to comply with AB 2339, which requires us to allow emergency shelters on, religious sites subject to some standards. So that is us implementing that. And then the development and indemnification. This is just to codify one of our existing conditions of approval that you've all seen, is that you have to indemnify the city and staff for taking action. And we are just updating with best practices to actually codify it and have it within our municipal code. And staff is available for any questions or discussion on this item.
Thank you. Appreciate your view graphs. We have a new town manager and we have a new planning director, and we're going to try something a little different tonight in terms of how we approach this project. I want to ask you first, before I turn it over to the commissioners, is there any particular area in which you want or don't want comment from us? I'm thinking in particular, I actually read the state code and I see where you made differences. Steph, are you wanting only comments within the 4 corners of your document or beyond? Or do you care?
So with this one, we're really looking to come into compliance with these 3 different elements. And I know there might be desire to comment, outside of a lot of things that are kind of proposed with ADUs specifically. And that's why I reiterate at the beginning that we haven't necessarily been given direction to expand the scope around the ADU ordinance to include a lot of potentially other kind of policy level decisions that were broader beyond trying to be in compliant with the state law. So that's something, if there's items that you feel should be major changes, I think the direction that kind of has been discussed is then we would, if there's major discussion that is a concern that should be addressed, that this would then go as an information item to town council and get direction from them on how we should further continue either this conversation or work. Because right now there's not necessarily budget or time allocated to address kind of larger policy
Got it.
changes. So tonight is more just about trying to come into compliance with the state law or best practices.
Thank you. That's very helpful. What we're going to do is we're going to have questions from the commissioners. And then we're going to have public comment, and then we'll go back and wrap up this agenda item with discussion from the commissioners. I want to be clear that these should be questions. So for example, the constant use of and/or applicant/permittee as a lawyer is like fingernails on a chalkboard to me. But I'm not going to talk about it as a question because it's something I'd rather discuss with you. So to the extent the commissioners have questions, let's start with the questions and come back to that later. Why don't we start with Vice Chair Krasinski?
Okay, thank you. During your presentation, you said something about state exempt ADUs, which I hadn't really understood from the packet. And can you explain that a little bit more? I think you said that basically state exempt ADUs don't need to follow the requirements. And so which ADUs does that apply to?
So state exempt ADUs is the common terminology for ADUs permitted under Government Code Section 66323. That section specifically states that we have to allow, for example, an 800 square foot ADU with 4-foot side and rear setbacks. We have to allow at least 8 detached ADUs on multifamily properties. So those are the kind of high level state exempt ADUs. It's the ones that are being proposed under those explicit provisions. So if I propose a 500 square foot ADU, all I have to do is do 4-foot side and rear setbacks. I don't have to comply with any other standards. We, in our document, we do have a statement there that we request or we encourage them to comply. But per state law, they could get, again, 4-foot side and rear setbacks, and then the height limitations. Our height limitations are consistent with state law, so it'd be our ordinance height limitations. Other than that, no objective design standards can be applied at all.
So I guess, it seems like we're mostly in this proposed ordinance allowing those the minimum size, minimum required ADUs. So I guess I'm a little bit confused, like what would be the characteristics of an ADU that would cause it to be not state exempt, but still qualify under this ordinance?
Generally, it would be the ADUs over 800 square feet.
But like
So
the
up
ordinance
to the
allows
1,000.
for 850 for the most part, right? So it's just like if they're 825, then
So if it's above 800, so if somebody proposed 825, they would be subject to our limitations, except that they could ask for more, depending on the size of the ADU.
okay. But-
Yes.
So if they're under 800 feet, then they can choose not to follow.
In most cases, yes, they are exempt from most of our standards.
Okay. I guess the next question.
Can I ask a follow-up on that, just to clarify that? So they're exempt from landscaping standards, they're exempt from lighting standards, are they exempt from, fire code standards?
They would
Clearly
need
there's
to
a line somewhere.
They would need to comply with fire life safety, regular building code standards
Okay,
and fire code standards, but no objective development standards, anything like that in our code or municipal code, the zoning code, could be applied. So with the only caveat is fire sprinklers are explicitly
okay.
exempted in state law, so we can never require fire sprinklers
Okay.
unless it's part of a new build.
Okay, thank you.
So I asked about this before the meeting, and I think you did a good job kind of addressing it in your presentation. I'm still a little bit stuck on it, so let me just
course.
reconfirm. So like in our 2021 ADU ordinance, we kind of satisfied the minimum requirement of the 800 or 850 square feet. But then we wanted to like encourage actually larger ADUs and also have, let's say, larger setbacks and maybe some other factors. So we have, we had or currently have essentially, you can build an 800 square foot ADU with a 4-foot setback, or you could build a 1,200 square foot ADU with a, I don't know, 10 or 15-foot setback. So are we really not able to do that, even though we're being more permissive than the minimum requirement?
So in the recent state law, they clarified that basically 4-foot side and rear setbacks are the maximum, period. Whether we allow bonus ADUs, anything like that, if we have an ADU ordinance, 4-foot side and rear setbacks, that's all we can apply. We have the ability to lessen it, be less restrictive, do 2 foot, 1 foot, 0 feet. I know there's no interest for that, but even if we're allowing a greater size, we cannot require any additional setback besides 4-foot side and rear. And that was clarified in their state law. Particularly, they added a new section that says the standards listed above are the maximum that you can apply. And so that's where that comes from. And so in the past, we were able to, that's why we adopted that ordinance. Additionally, I actually have a HCD review letter of another jurisdiction that did that. And they were told no. That they're like, hey, we'll do 10-foot setbacks. You get up to 1,200. And the state came back and said, no, that's not consistent with state law.
Okay.
The state as HCD, right?
HCD's guidance on it, but also under the state law government code section.
Okay.
Yes.
Sorry.
That's okay. So we currently, I believe, in many cases, allow 1,200 square foot ADUs. If we wanted to still allow 1,200 square foot ADUs, I guess with a 4-foot setback, could we choose to do that?
Yes, we can choose to allow, it does fall into kind of the policy discussions. That is definitely, I've seen it as kind of standard practice now. A lot of jurisdictions are just doing the 1,200 square foot and just saying, there you go, 1,200 square feet. We don't care the number of bedrooms, anything, just 1,200 is the number. And a lot of that is also, there's an interesting caveat in state law that says if any section of our ordinance is non-compliant, the entirety of the ordinance is invalid and we cannot apply anything. And we default to state law, and state law allows 1,200 square foot. So that's why a lot of jurisdictions have taken that approach, is just, well, if state law is going to allow it anyways, let's just do that.
Okay. And I guess you mentioned that another way around this for property owners is to use SB 9,
That is correct.
so if someone wants to build, say, a 1,200 square foot unit on their property, what are the downsides of SB 9 using it?
So SB 9, our SB 9 ordinance does need to be updated. There have been some changes. We can only apply the underlying objective standards for the code. So for example, we have the AMFA. So let's say your site allows up to 6,000 square foot, floor area. Your house is only 3,000. Under SB 9, you could do another 3,000 square foot unit. So that is where it's beneficial, is that you basically get the remainder of the difference in the AMFA. And that we actually, I believe, have one SB 9 unit that was reviewed and approved a couple years ago, and we actually have one active now that they're exactly doing that. Along with SB 9, again, you're allowed up to 4 units. All units have to be a minimum of, we have to minimally allow 800 square feet. So somebody could do, hey, I want to do an SB 9 unit, finish maxing out my square footage, and now they're still eligible for ADUs. I can come back and do 2 ADUs at 800 square feet, and they can blow through the AMFA. That's where the benefit is, and that's why a lot of property owners are going that direction. There's a downside for us, but not for property owners. I mean, right now, we do say there needs to be restriction. But that is no longer consistent with state law because we don't require a deed restriction for regular units of the underlying zoning district.
The 4 units that you mentioned, that's with a lot split or?
That doesn't have to be a lot split.
I see.
So how it is basically you could do two SB9 units with 2 ADUs. So you would get to the 4 units. So how SB9 is worded, it's 4 units in any configuration with or without a lot split. A lot split would result in 2 units on each lot.
Is that, I mean, in my mind, there was a lot split involved with SB9. Did that change at some point? Or?
So there's always been 2 parts to SB9. So SB9, there's the non-lot split option, which allows up to 4 units. Then there's the lot split option where you can split the lot, but you only get 2 units on each lot for a total of 4 units on what used to be 1 lot. So that has been how SB9 was always worded. They just simplified the standards and made it easier for people to do it.
Okay. So you talked about the ADUs that have been permitted, and I guess, do I understand right that all of the ADUs that have been permitted in the last few years would still be allowed, would still have been allowed under the new proposed standards, even though they are more restrictive on the size?
There would be 4 ADUs that wouldn't have been permitted because they're at 1,200 square feet.
I see.
Of that, the rest of them, 800, 800. I think there is 2 900s, but everything else is 800 and below. And a lot of that, just anecdotally, I think a lot of that comes from impact fees, and there's other fees when you're smaller in size. So under 750, you don't pay impact fees. Under 550, you don't pay school impact fees. So that's why a lot of the ADUs are tending towards smaller, just as a little bit of context.
Okay. So I guess in addition or separately from the code, there was a resident group that put together a guide that then was the planning director put up on the planning and building website, ADU, JADU information, and there's a fact. I guess just double checking that you're aware of that, and that would need to be updated, I guess, if there are
Yes,
changes.
we are aware of it, and we do have plans to update all those documents. With Sarah on board, we are also evaluating just all our applications anyways, and trying to do some cleanup to make it easier for people.
Okay. On page 23 of the packet, you get under C, the II, there's an ADU that does not meet the criteria of subsection 2 II above.
Yes,
What's that referring to?
so that actually is supposed to be subsection 1. There was an additional, in an earlier draft, there was an additional section that was talking about JADUs, which we moved to the JADU section. So that is just a typo.
Okay.
So it's subsection 1, not little I, correct? Or the
It would be
subsection
little,
I,
yeah, so it would be,
3, 1, I, okay.
yeah, so instead of the double I, it's 1 I.
And I had the question about the separate address and which you kind of addressed, but I guess from what you said during the presentation for JADUs, maybe it's a little bit more of a open question. So I guess in the proposal, we are requiring a separate address for both ADUs and JADUs?
As of right now, yes. There is a bit of an open question on JADUs when they are the internal ADUs. So JADUs still need a separate exit. And originally, it was that they would have to have an internal exit as well. However, if it has its own bathroom, it no longer needs that. So it wouldn't be accessible from the inside of the house. So in those type of JADUs, we may want to require an address because again, it's not accessible from inside. So if a firefighter enters the house, there's a portion that may not be able to get access to if they don't know that there's another address there.
For the JADU? Or? Uh-huh.
So the JADU, if it has a bathroom inside the JADU area, It does not need a door to the rest of the house. It can have just an exterior private entrance.
I see.
But if it's sharing a bathroom with the house, then it has to have an internal door. If it's sharing the bathroom with the house, it might not make sense for us to require an address.
Okay, and if we wanted to recommend that, that would be a change to what's currently here?
We can, yeah, we can definitely, this is one of those almost policy items, so definitely feedback and we'll report it back to the council.
Um,
Commission.
About-
On, yeah, so on the JADUs, and I guess if someone builds a JADU that does not have sanitation facilities, I believe, then there's a restriction on renting, that there's basically an owner occupancy requirement.
That is correct.
And so if I understand right, that means if someone builds that type of JADU, they're not even allowed to rent their entire house plus the JADU
Right.
anymore?
They would have to live in one of the units. So yes, they would not be able to rent out both units.
Which, I mean, that seems like a big disincentive for someone building a JADU. Are we required to have that stipulation?
That is listed in state law as that requirement. There has been mixed feedback in HCD's technical review or ordinance review letters. Some saying you have to have it in there because that's what state law says, and other ones saying, well, you're being less restrictive and that's allowed. So we would have to get clarification. We can propose it not having it, but we might get HCD letter back saying, put it back in.
On page 36 to 37 and what's been crossed out of our old standard, there were safety standards for fire safety and geologic safety. And I looked up the 2023 HCD letter, and I guess I felt like, I mean, they did call these out, but it seemed like they were maybe leaving a little bit more room that we could have some safety standards, as long as they were sort of objective and applied to all development. Yeah, I don't know. Is there any possibility of keeping some?
So we got another comment from another commissioner regarding that, and staff is going to reevaluate them and see if they are applicable. The one thing to keep in mind, since they're talking about the objective standards, again, they would only apply to the 800 and above ADUs. They wouldn't apply to less than. Again, however, the building department and the building official can always make site-specific findings for fire life safety. So let's say there is a geologic zone. It's like, hey, that's actually an active landslide. You can't put an ADU there. We have to take it site by site specific, and that is at the building official's determination. They have to write a letter basically saying that. HCD has basically provided guidance that we shouldn't do more of these blanket, like, hey, in any PD soil, you can't have an ADU. They don't want that. They want us to do site by site specific evaluations. So staff will reanalyze those and see what we can apply. But given their more recent guidance, we may be still limited on what we can.
Okay. Last question, in the public public comments that we received, there's a letter from Cal HDF. Have you reviewed that letter, and do you think there's anything in there that is calling out something that's not allowed in what we've proposed?
Most of it is just clarifying, and we had it in one of our standards, but it didn't carry over, is again, those state exempt, the government code section 66323, where it says, these are the ADUs you have to allow with only these standards. Some of our standards, we didn't add that language in. We said, oh, unless it doesn't allow an 800 square foot ADU. So there is validity to all their comments. So staff is reevaluating it, and most likely we'll just slip back in that language that says, here's the standard, but it doesn't apply to these units.
Mhm.
And then multifamily is one of them. that staff, in a lot of our standards, we were focused on single family, forgetting that multifamily now allows 800 square foot ADUs. And that's under that same government code section. So that was a lot of the issues that they are pointing out, is that we forgot to consider the multifamily.
Okay. Thank you. That's all my questions.
Commissioner Targ, welcome. Thank you. If you'd like to ask your questions. I announced before you got here that we're going to take our questions, then we're going to take public comment, and then we will have our discussion later. So do your best to ask questions, not discuss.
There was a notice provision previously for ADUs, and there was a recognition at the time that that was included in the code, that the notice provision didn't actually do much in terms of influencing the outcome, because in some cases it was ministerial. I believe that the notice provision has been taken out here.
That-
Can you walk us through?
Yes, so in HCD's handbook, they clarified that notice requirements are not compliant with state law. It's supposed to be, again, a ministerial process, just us reviewing for compliance with our objective standards that when we can apply, and building code requirements. And even inviting for public comment could be seen as subjective. And that is per their technical guidance. So it is interesting, that guidance from HCD. But that is where we currently stand, and that's why we did not include that provision, was so that HCD wouldn't make that comment to us that, hey, that's not compliant, since it's in their guidance.
Stunning.
Yeah, we can return to that one.
Is a 15-day completeness determination. How does that affect staff able to respond to that? And one of the things that was unclear to me is, unlike some other provisions where you would permit streamlining or AB 301, post entitlement, where if you blow through your 30-day, which is, I think, more typical, is deemed complete. I didn't see the sort of the other shoe drop in this. Did I miss something? And is staff able to respond within 15 days?
So yeah, so this is one of the very recent state laws that went into effect at the beginning of this year. So the 15-day determination is just, do you have all the documents needed? With building permits, our building permit staff already does that before it even accepts an application. Do you have your application? Do you have your plans? Do you have your technical reports? So we actually are doing it within 1 to 2 days. So that's really what it's focused on, is do you have all the documents per the checklist?
Right.
Not whether they're right or wrong, but just do you have everything? And so it actually does not impact staff's current operations. I think this is really to address jurisdictions that were, taking their time, going, we have 30 days. Oh yeah, no, you didn't submit all the documents. Try again.
So I'm sorry, so staff won't accept an application until it's done a completeness review?
So-
That's Is that what I mean, that may be, that may be beyond the scope of what we're talking about. but
For building permits, particularly for ADUs, there is a checklist. You need to submit all these documents.
Sure.
The counter staff reviews the checklist and makes sure all documents are provided. If the documents are not provided, staff will say this is not a complete application. Please provide the required documents and submit.
Got it. So it's done at the desk at the time that it's being.
Yes, when it's emailed, in most cases, there tend to be emailed in with our building team. They do it as soon as they receive it. They do that review and let them know, again, almost immediately that, hey, not all the documents are here. Please submit all the documents required.
Can I ask a follow-on question, Nicholas? I looked in the code and I did not see this 15 days. I saw the 60 days. We're at page 21 here, but I did not see the 15 days for your completion
The-
review.
Yeah, it's red page 51. I think.
Let's see. I was just wondering the code, the state code reference that added the 15 days. I'm on red page 21,
Where am I? Yeah,
SB 543.
red page 50.
So is that in section 66.3? Let's see. Oh my God, if I go look at my code here, I'll lose the screen.
So
It wasn't
is-
in the code, it wasn't in the codified version of the government code that I looked at.
It's actually in section 66311, it looks like.
66311. Okay, all right. Well, I trust you on that, but Nicholas, I had the same reaction.
Yeah, that's good.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, I think this is what I've got. Says a point. One could do an SB9 lot split, then have a JDU and ADU. So essentially 3 units on one parcel. 2 more units on the other.
So SB9 is in any combination, the maximum units is 4. So even with ADU law, so in SB9 law, it specifically says you can make use of state ADU law, except at no point should you have more than 4 units on what used to be 1 lot.
Okay.
And the JDU is considered to be a unit.
It would be, yes. So somebody could propose a house with a JADU. They wouldn't necessarily get an ADU because SB9 law doesn't allow them that. They can only have the 4 units total.
Thank you. No, I don't have anything further. So, very interesting.
I'm sorry, correction. Okay. Thank you.
Just to answer your question about which government code section, 66317A. A permitting agency shall determine whether an application to create or serve an accessory dwelling unit is complete and provide written notice to the determination to the applicant no later than 15 business days after the permitting agency receives the application. And this is brand new, so we're just still, getting used to it, but yeah.
Thank you.
And it goes on to say, if a permitting agency does not make a timely determination as required by this paragraph, the application or resubmitted application shall be deemed to be complete for the purposes of this section.
Got nothing further. Thank you.
Commissioner Batra, questions for our consultants
Um,
from you?
Thankfully, almost all my questions have been answered. I just have a few small things. I just had a question on the developer indemnification. I've noticed for the last 10 years, there's been a handful of lawsuits by homeowners trying to seek some remedy from the developer, and they include the town. So that would require that developer to pretty much pay any fees that for your time, for example.
Yes, exactly. And this is a standard condition of approval, but it actually is not codified in the town
Yeah,
municipal
okay.
code. And so as a staff report, referenced, we did have a negotiation about that with Stanford. for the Portola Terrace project, and it made us realize that we should have that codified.
Yeah, and there's been a couple of other small ones. Okay, I just wanted to make sure I understood that. Another question on no front set yard setback applies. There's also the right of way, and how does that work with the front setback?
So the front setback is measured from the property line. So the property line is generally where the right of way line is. In most sites in Portola Valley, that's not right where the road ends. There's usually 3 to, I think even on Alpine, there's like 10, 20
Okay,
feet. So it would be then measured from that line
Okay.
back.
Uh, Bathroom and sanitation facility are equivalent terms?
Yes, they use sanitation facility in the state law legislation.
Okay,
for
just
bathroom.
wanted to make sure. And my last obscure question is, if I build a brand new house with a JADU, does SB 543 allow me to not pay school fees for that square footage?
So the bill that we were just talking about,
543, it just seemed like, oh, well, you can throw in a JADU to keep your fees lower.
in general, yes. JADUs, when built as part of that, are not subject to school fees or really utility fees or things like that. So that generally that square footage would be exempt,
Okay,
yes.
okay, thank you. That's all I have for questions.
Thank you. Commissioner Morris.
I just have a couple questions. First of all, is just on the process as it relates to updating the zoning and the ordinance, and that we received this letter in 2023. And I'm just wondering about what is the expectation from HCD in our response? I thought there was a section that said we need to respond within 60 days. And so are there any consequences for not responding? And when do we need to get this done so that we're on their good side?
So they did recently, again, as part of the recent state laws, actually codify the 60 days. Previously, that wasn't codified. HCD was asking us to. But now that it is codified, we have been in touch with them, letting them know we are pursuing it right now, that we are actively working on it. So that has been some coordination, but that's also why staff is working to really try to get it up within the next month or two to get it to town council so that we can get it adopted and also include it in our annual reporting to the state that yes, we are now compliant with our ADU ordinance and we are good. Because that is actually one of their questions on our annual reporting now.
And related to that, when we do the submission, do they then come back to us quite timely with comments and say, okay, you're 95% of the way there, and there you have these, few things that need to be fixed? Because there seems to be different interpretations as per like the letter that came in mainly related to the multifamily. And
Yes, so if I remember correctly, one of the state bills, when they codified the 60-day, we have to respond by 30 days. It also codified HCD's own review time. However, I'm aware of jurisdictions that submitted their ordinances to HCD a year ago and still haven't got a review letter. So HCD is kind of on their own timeline. We'll get a review letter when we get it and we'll just have to respond. That's why staff has reviewed their other letters because we're trying to make sure our first go gets us there. We're trying to be very concise and focus in responding to what they've told other jurisdictions so that we don't get a letter.
sure.
On the 60-day requirement in general, like when if HCD sends a letter and we need a reply, that doesn't mean that we necessarily have to like change and adopt the code in that timeline, is that right?
They give us basically options. We either need to modify our code, let us know, yes, we're modifying our code. We're moving forward. 60-day doesn't work well with state law saying before we go to a hearing for any zoning changes with the planning commission, we have a 20-day notice instead of a 10-day notice. So we will work with them. They have been flexible with other jurisdictions. As long as we're showing effort and we are moving forward, they won't fine us or cite us or whatever they can do. They'll work with us. Or we just repeal the ordinance and just default to state law as it's read in state law. Those are the two options they give us. Change it or repeal it and just follow state law. And that would be the 1,200 square foot ADU, 4-foot side and rear setbacks, and then the height limits, and that's it.
Another question I have, what happens with, is there an effective date for these changes, and what happens to permits that are in process?
So generally, there is an effective date of the ordinance. It generally is 30 days after the second reading. So the town council will review it, have a public hearing, then they'll have a second reading, reintroduce it, and that's their actual adoption date. So it'd be 30 days from that. Generally, what happens is ADUs that are currently submitted and in process will retain their approvals from the old code. And so it'd only be new submissions that would come in after the effective date.
Okay. And I didn't fully follow the 800 square feet versus 1,200 square feet, and my gist of it, what I caught was, it made me think, why are we doing 800 square feet rather than 1,200 square feet if that's what the state is going to default to and other jurisdictions have defaulted to that? So can you re-explain that to me?
Yeah, so as it currently is proposed, a non-state exempt would be allowed up to 1,000. And that's just based off of in-state law. It says you can do these things, which include a maximum size for a 2-bedroom ADU of 1,000 square feet. There is another provision that says we can go up to 1,200. We can also go higher than that, but that's kind of where that is. So we were following the bare minimum, which is 1,000 as prescribed in state law. We can go up to 1,200. Again, that is kind of a policy. If the city council wants us to do that, we can definitely propose it. And again, a lot of jurisdictions have been doing it as best practice, as just I don't want to worry about bedrooms. Let's just say 1,200 for everyone.
And
Yeah, go ahead.
Essentially, there are two tracks for ADU projects. One would be the state exempt route, which is much more streamlined. But the requirement is you've got to be 800 square feet or less.
Okay.
Go that route. The other route, if you want to have a larger ADU, would also be ministerial, but you need to comply with additional objective criteria. And that's where the policy call for the town comes in, whether to allow ADUs up to 1,000 square feet, or whether you want to allow them up to 1,200 square feet or even larger. So on that second track, there's a policy decision for you to make.
And currently we're at 1,000 square feet. And the proposal from
In the proposal, it's
BFL
1,000.
is
What
to
is the on
stay
the
there.
books?
Is that right?
Yeah, so as proposed, we're at 1,000. On the books now, that's where kind of our earlier conversation, we do allow up to 1,200, but with increased setbacks and even up to 1,500 if you're larger, which are no longer compliant because of the setback issue.
But didn't you say that we can't require those setbacks now, even if it's at 1,200? So
That's
isn't
correct.
that kind of mute then?
Yeah, so
Okay.
what we're proposing is 1,000. It is possible for us to go to 1,200 if that is the policy decision. Our current books, our current requirements are generally 850. Then it goes up to 1,200 if you meet our zoning code setbacks, and then 1,500 if you are on a larger lot.
My last question is more of a, just kind of looking in the future, what is the takeaway for developers, property owners, as we implement these new ordinances and for staff at the town, does it become easier, more desirable, more frequent? Does this make a difference at the end of the day for the number of applications that we're going to get to build these? Is it going to be harder or easier for the town to move the process along? I guess I'm just like, what is the practical implications of these changes?
I mean, these changes will streamline a lot of our reviews because staff is currently looking at our existing ordinance. We can't apply that. That's state law says we can't do that. And so that does take time for staff to work through. We also have applicants that are proposing things that are not compliant. So being able to have clear, easy standards should simplify our reviews. I think I'm not anticipating a increase in the number of ADU permits necessarily, besides the normal trend that we're seeing, just as more people are wanting them because of these standards. If somebody want an ADU, they can propose it at the 800 and they have been. And that is, again, that most simplified track, easiest track, just your building permit tracked. So again, I think it will simplify our reviews and make it a little easier. The less standards, in a way, the less standards we have, and the more that it is 4-foot setbacks, yep, 18-foot height, yes, makes it easier on staff, which does turn around permits quicker for property owners and applicants.
But it doesn't change too much from the property owner's side.
It might make it a little easier than in trying to read our ordinance and interpret and figure out what can apply and what doesn't. But I don't anticipate a major change for the developer submitting or the property owner submitting. That's still going to be very similar to our existing process. It's just what standards have they designed to.
Okay. That's it. Thanks.
I have a few questions that border on comments, but I'll ask them as questions. I'll start with the indemnification provision. Why did you call it developer indemnification? The town's what's being indemnified. And in some instances, your applicant isn't a developer.
I think this code section could be renamed. This section often is called developer indemnification in other municipal codes. And Chair, I want to actually raise one point that I got an email from a member of the community letting me know that the room was muted during roll call and apparently during the request for oral communications. And so folks did not have an opportunity to make comments during that agenda item.
Okay.
So I guess I would recommend that you take that perhaps after this item and up to you if you want to take a pause here, but that might make the most sense for efficiency.
I did see Rita's hand come up at one point. If you don't mind, let me finish my questions and then I'm going to go to public comment anyway. So I'll include any public comment on items not on our agenda as well as comments on our agenda. And at that point, I already have 2 hands up. Okay, the reason I asked that question is it seems strange to me to have I guess it's this first incredibly long sentence, which includes the Public Records Act in a developer indemnification provision. It seems to me that dealing with the Public Records Act costs should be elsewhere. It's not an indemnification. It's in a traditional sense, it's paying for services. So I think this needs to be rethought, but maybe I'm missing something.
I'll just mention one thing, which we've found as staff is that it is not uncommon for applicants that perhaps are not getting exactly what they want to submit a Public Records Act request related to their, a Public Records Act request related to their permit application or prior applications related to property. And so this is an attempt to recover the town's costs for responding to that PRA request. Otherwise, the PRA requests are actually pretty expensive for the town. It can be. And there is nothing in the Public Records Act that allows towns to recover costs from the
Fair.
requester.
I don't object to its inclusion. I object to the fact that it's different from a larger indemnification related to, for example, a large development. You use the phrase applicant / permittee. When you're an applicant is when you start, and if by the time you've become a permittee, you haven't addressed the indemnification, then I think you need to put a separate sentence in here explaining that to me, or maybe you can explain it to me now. I don't like slashes. I think they're shorthand and I don't think they mean anything. So
Noted. Thank you.
noted. Okay. And this goes throughout. I definitely think we should be indemnified. I think we should be indemnified to the maximum extent allowable. And the proof of coverage provision, first of all, there's the option of actually some sort of a financial guarantee or letter of credit isn't specifically mentioned. I think you can clarify the language to say or other comparable things, how you want to do that. And then I don't know why, and this is still a question, but I don't know why you said consistent with applicable insurance standards in town. It would seem to me, wouldn't you want to require indemnification in the maximum discretion of the town? I mean, you're running this show. Why would you want to be limited by your insurance requirements? Can you explain that to me? Or?
I think definitely take that into consideration. This is intended to give discretion to the town to increase those insurance standards. I mean, that's naturally what does happen. We, as inflation and other things get more expensive, than our insurance provider, Plan JPA, for example, which is a municipal pooling authority, will recommend increased insurance coverage requirements. And so this was intended to, go up with increasing standards. But I understand your point that why create a suggestion that, we have limits at all.
Okay, I had a couple of other questions. I'm back now at red page 21. Things that bothers me is that every time the legislature decides they want to do something so they look good for their constituents or satisfy their lobbyists, they're changing these laws. And we're going to just be in this forever to-do loop, which costs us and other small towns a lot of money. I wonder if in any of these laws there's any consideration for small towns having different standards than, we have the same standards here as Los Angeles. And so this comes up for me when I read the first 18.25.010, which basically says if we did it wrong, read the government code. Do you know anything about that?
Sadly, the state does not, they're taking a one-size-fits-all approach, particularly with ADUs. And a lot of housing laws, they're not really tailoring it to smaller jurisdictions. And I am not aware of any provisions, particularly in ADU law, that would exempt or allow for alternate provisions for towns.
Yes, I wonder, do we have any lobbying groups for small towns, or are you aware of any efforts to do that?
Sure, I don't know if you are or.
I'll just say, I know at Cal Cities, of course, they are a statewide lobbyist and advocacy organization for cities throughout the state. They do have small city coalitions, but I am not aware of the specific efforts about whether they're advocating regarding
I mean,
ADU law.
a specific example of this is the earlier question about the 15-day completion requirement. I must not have read the latest version of the code because it was not in the code that I read. So, you know, bad Linda, I didn't read a 1-month-old code. I read the 2-month-old code. And it's just a perfect example of how we're going to be in this endless to-do loop. Okay. Let me go through. I have just a few other questions. I was confused by, I'm at page, red page 20. I'm sorry, I stapled it. Red page 24. We're talking about the size here. We're under the multifamily ADUs, and I think I found it in some areas as well. Existing floor area, ADUs converted from existing floor area should not be subject to any size limitations. Is the implication there that it is within the existing floor?
That's correct.
If that's the case, I think you better write this more clearly.
Yeah, we can update it to be a little more
It's-
clear.
It's got to be the size that's being converted or smaller, right?
Yeah,
Am I
and,
right?
yep,
Okay. Because that's not what that says. It basically says I can convert 100 square feet to 1,000, the way it's written.
Okay.
Okay, just want to be clear. See, I had the same question over on page 25. This is same dimension. So, oh no, that was setbacks. Okay. I reached the same conclusion as you did on parking. I'm on page 20, 25, the very top, it's III, replacement parking shall not be required when a carport. There was recently a case that came out of the Portola Valley Ranch regarding a carport conversion to an ADU, and I haven't read it carefully, but I find this particularly troubling, this section. Is this straight out of the state code? Okay. So if it is, I gather you have no choice, right? And that case was decided after the legislature left town, so maybe they'll just make another change. You don't have to do it right now, but I raised that question. I was confused, I guess, for lack of a better word. Again, on page 27, utility connection. This discussion of connection fees and so on and so forth, that's not our business. That's the PG&E or the water company business, right? What are we trying to accomplish with that section? I'm looking at I2.
so this is actually in response to HCD's letters that they're sending the other jurisdictions on their ordinance reviews. They've pointed this out like, hey, why don't you discuss the fees, even though we're not the fee providers in this case, we have separate utilities, that conversation should be in your ordinance. So we are adding a little bit of that conversation in just based off of their guidance. It is in the state law legislations about when fees apply. But that's why that is there. It's just based off of the feedback they've given other jurisdictions.
Okay, which you got the law, then you got the regulations, then you got the guidance, then you got the feedback.
Mm-hmm.
You can tell how I feel about that. Going backwards, my last comment, page 21, administration and permitting process, A, building permit, and you say, B, ministerial review. a permit application for an ADU, it should say or JADU, not and/or, shall be processed ministerially, and then you've added without discretionary review or a hearing. I didn't see that part in the code. You added that? I mean, ministerial is ministerial. Why do we want to take the time to justify it further?
We can remove that. I think that was to clarify for an applicant trying to read this law. What does that mean? What is ministerial? Because a homeowner might not actually know what ministerial is. So that was the intent, just, it is over explaining it, but it is trying to just make it so what an applicant could understand what that meant. But
I
we can
could
definitely remove
Think
it.
of a scenario where you might have a hearing or a public meeting that it could still be ministerial. So that's what, part of why I object. Plus, I think if you can't read the code, pay your tax bill or something, get a lawyer. Okay, we have now, the commissioners have now asked all their questions. And as I said at the outset, we'll turn to public comment on this. And Rita, I saw your hand go up partway through the meeting. And if you want to speak to something that's not on our agenda, I'll start with you. Just so others know, and you can get ready with your mute buttons. Then I have David Cardinal, and then I have Karen Askey, and you'll each get 3 minutes. And you'll get, if I overlooked something at the beginning of the meeting, you can get 3 minutes there. And if you want to talk about this, you get 3 more minutes. So just proceed. Rita,
Okay, can you hear me?
loud and clear. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I did have a statement. I sent in a comment about this really wonderful colleagues memo that Chair Brothers had put in, and it seems to have gotten lost along the way. And once again, we've had no planning meetings or constantly canceled planning meetings. And I would really like to hear an update, if not at this meeting, at a future meeting, what's going on with that. Because, we do have staff, and I appreciate that we have hired more people and whatnot. But these are everyday underlying issues for our town. And so I really hope that that is revisited and pushed forward, because like I said, once again, we've had many meetings that have been canceled. And I know there's promises of not canceling, but this is our reality. So that is my oral statement and my letter. But my statement for what you have just done with these new ordinances is about the indemnity clause that's on page 5. And so as the town of Portola Valley, consider this clause that we're adding in, I hope that we do not put the town in more litigation situations due to things that have been approved by Good City and other building contractors that we have employed to do the work on behalf of Portola Valley. I hope that we have our building and other contractors holding insurance to cover errors. I'll not list the errors that I'm aware of, but they should hold some responsibility and for these legal costs associated with these errors. And that should be added in there. And thank you for listening to my concerns. Appreciate your volunteering.
Thank you. I will address my subcommittee when we get to committee reports. And thank you for staying in the time limit. Next up, David Cardinal.
Sure. First of all, thanks for this meeting. And I think some of my questions have been answered. I want to start with a mea culpa, which Linda pointed out to me. I mentioned that we had 5,000 people 50 years ago. And that is true according to the census data, but she encouraged me and we dug into it more. And George Mader attempted to correct the census data down to 3,961. So in fact, going to 5,000 would be a new adventure for us. So I just want to get on the record with that. As far as tonight's topic, I'm bummed that we can't, for example, require sprinklers. I'm hopeful that we can use the fire code. Those are my questions, which were kind of answered earlier. The one question I do have is that it says that for multifamily, they can have up to 8 ADUs. And I'm kind of curious, do we have any multifamily other than, I don't know, Willow Commons and maybe the Portola Terrace? And I mean, that sounds like a lot, but does it cover anywhere else, or is it just a couple little wedge, not wedge, that's a bad word, but a couple little niche zoning cases? And I want to say to our planner, I don't want to get his name wrong, but oh my God, you are so well versed in all this. That's huge. I think that's a badge of honor because it is really hard. I've tried to keep up with some of the laws and it's nuts. So I'm glad you're doing it for us, and I'm glad we're doing what we can to salvage what's a tricky situation where our options have obviously gotten super limited. So thanks. That's it for me.
Thank you. Next up, I have Karen Askey, and then although I have 3 or 4 other attendees, I do not see any hands raised. So if you want to speak, let me know now. Karen, go ahead.
Hi all, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Yeah, first of all, thank you to Brendan for this very informative presentation and clarifying a lot of things. I do have 3 questions. One is you mentioned the 8 units, the 8 ADUs for multifamily zoning. I'm wondering if that also will apply to multi-use zones, because that's up on our docket these days. So if you can answer that. Number 2 is with respect to the 4-foot setback. We could have 2 adjacent homes that decide to put their ADUs within the 4-foot setback. So we could have structures that are 8 feet apart, if I'm understanding this correctly. And my concern with that is, are there impacts related to the fire ordinances and fire safety with structures being 8 feet apart, as well as we have fencing setback regulations, and I believe those are further back than what these new ADU setbacks are. So how is that going to be impacted? And then third, I just want to make sure I'm understanding something correctly. So I'm going to recap this and you can just say yes or clarify it. With our current law, we were allowing up to an 850 square foot ADU to have ministerial review effectively per the state's 800. And we're changing that now to 800. So we're going from the 850 to the 800. And then we had 1,200 feet for outside of the state mandate for lots that were less than 3.5 acres. And your proposal goes to 1,000, but we could indeed go up to 1,200, which is the state maximum now. And so the 1,500 that we were currently allowing if the lot was greater than 3.5 acres completely goes away. And I just wanted to make sure I was understanding that. And then last is if indeed you're going to decide between 1,000 and 1,200, my personal vote is that we still allow up to 1,200 for our residents. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no other hands raised, I'm going to close the public comment on this matter before us. And I will ask Brandon to respond to Karen's specific questions if he can.
Yes. So in regards to the setback, so we would have to default to building code. There are things you can do such as fire rated construction, which generally does kick in when you're less than 5 feet from a property line. There's additional provisions in the building code that you have to do. However, 8 buildings 8 feet away, this occurs on other lots, even on our existing lots. You can have a shed 8 feet away or a garage port 8 feet away, and that isn't seen necessarily as a fire impact per our current building code. There may be some other provisions and that we recently adopted. I know our fire code did just go up recently. Those and any of the standards within our building code and fire code can be applied generally if it's directly related to fire life safety. The only one that is explicitly carved out is the sprinklers, as kind of discussed earlier, that if an existing house doesn't have sprinklers, you cannot require it. It just that end all be all, there is no way that we have even, at the fire marshal's discretion, any of that. It's not. However, if you build a new house and you happen to build an ADU with it, yes, you have to sprinkler both. So it really will just depend on what, they propose at that time. And I was reviewing through some of her other questions, so,
What about
Mhm.
the 8 units associated with multifamily? That's in the state code. She asked about multi-use.
So, and I'm reading that section right now. It does talk about multifamily units or dwellings, which you could have a multifamily dwelling within a mixed use building. So most likely, yes, it does apply, but I would have to look at Catherine to see the legal interpretation
So
on
it's
that.
the dwelling, not necessarily zoning, that would be operative.
That is correct.
Okay.
And then, let's see.
We voted.
4-foot setbacks, yes, the fencing. So that is a unique one where we do have the fencing. If they do build an ADU consistent with state law, it's possible that area won't be able to be fenced or the fence will have to go around that unit. That's just how our provisions are currently. There may need to be direction from council if they want us to read our fencing ordinance. But as of right now, any proposed fencing would need to meet our ordinance, but an ADU can be closer.
Thank you.
One
And
of
then I
the
think she had
questions-
one more.
Oh, was there another question? had
Well,
the
she asked
fence-
if 850 was becoming 800.
Well, I thought she was expressing an opinion there.
She was confirming the ministerial review, and I believe I would have to pull up the code really quick and look at that again. So I would need a moment on that one.
But
Okay.
there still is there is an 850 in the proposed ordinance.
Yeah, the 850, so that's our maximum size for a studio or 1 bedroom, and then 1,000 for a 2 or more bedroom ADU. And I think currently, and that's what I wanted to read under the existing ordinance. Just give me one quick moment. Way too many numbers running around in my head. If we had any other discussion, I can come back to that if you would give me a few
Okay.
moments.
Okay. Okay. Do you have something there? Commissioners, I guess, having now asked our questions, this is the part of the agenda where we can provide opinion and feedback to Brendan and Sarah as to how they go forward here. And why don't we go in the opposite direction? Doug, would you like to go first? Any discussion that you'd like to provide?
Would this be the time that we'd actually give our thoughts as relates to the square footage or, that type of thing? Where you're interested in that, or is that?
Yeah, I mean, I think personally, anything that is on the 4 corners of the document, and even beyond that, if there are things we think need to be incorporated, like how does this relate to SB 9? It's not on this document, but it's in your head. All of that stuff.
Okay.
Keeping it as relevant to what we have in front of us as possible. Does that answer your question?
Sure. I just have I guess, a overall perception, and it goes to Karen Askey's comment, is that, and it relates to the housing elements, it seems like ADUs and JADUs should be a desirable means of adding housing in Portola Valley to meet our requirements compared to other options that we have, which, cause a lot of tension in coming up with those decisions. So it was a little unfortunate to hear that what's the impact on the applicants and their desire to build more ADUs and ADUs is the answer was none. And so I would think the 1,200 feet would make things simpler, would make it more desirable, not having to worry about whether it's a studio or 1 bedroom or 2 bedroom. I guess the more we could do to make this desirable for property owners and developers to build these seems like it would be a plus to me. And it doesn't sound like we've gotten there. So that's my overall comment.
Thank you. Karen. Vatra, excuse me.
I have a few comments. Square footage, since we just brought that up, I'm kind of struggling with this one because, well, I didn't grow up particularly wealthy, and to me, 1,200 square foot is a house. It's not an ADU. So I'm struggling to think of that as just something you would add on. So, to me, that seems too big. And I'm also concerned with, not having any of our, objective standards allowed at all, and just, making that at such a large scale. So if it works with SB 9 or maybe our opt-in program that we still have to work on, there may be other solutions. So I'm kind of, I don't really have an answer at this moment on that. But I would not be particularly comfortable going all the way to 1,200. Especially like with the fencing issues, the fire safety, getting all those buildings together. I don't want to go too crazy. I don't want to, and I don't think that if we had something objective that it would really stop somebody from building it, building what they want. That's kind of where I'm at that. The JAD rental thing to me seems really strange. That you'd have to be in the main house to rent it out. And if you decided to go to Europe for a year, which we often seem to hear about in the forum, people going to Europe for a year, and you happen to have a JADU, you can't rent your main house. That just doesn't make any sense to me. Also separate addresses for, yeah, and the separate address for JADU seems really strange to me too, because I would think first of all, mailboxes, I mean, I go to my mailbox every couple of weeks. There's nothing in there that's important. So to me, it's junk mail or, very occasionally, everything else is online. And the fire department's also requiring more reflective letters in the mailboxes. So why don't we just, I think that can be shared, especially if you're probably sharing a door. You can hand people's junk mail. And I'm just struggling to also think of the situation where there's one building, there's a fire, there's a medical emergency, that firemen are not going to go in every room and every window and save the person's life. I'm struggling with that. I can see that with the fixed ADU. That's a different building, but I'm struggling with seeing that need for the fire department. I'd be happy to hear them if they have a stronger opinion about that I'm not seeing. And I'm also struggling with the geological concerns, and that you can go, oh, I'll build right on the San Andreas Fault. I want to build housing. I'll build a whole row there. And it seems like can't we do something with that one in some way? And I would think even as a homeowner who might want to build an ADU, I would want to see that. Oh yeah, I should go look at that map so I understand it better. So I'm kind of struggling with having that out. So that's my general ideas.
Following up on that, Brendan, can you answer what parts of our code will still be applicable or may not be our zoning code, but presumably our building code? Presumably they're going to have electrical inspections and all of that sort of stuff. But I totally agree with Karen, there's so much in here that just has to be ministerial. What's outside the limits of this document that will still be required?
Yeah, so when it comes to building and fire code, that is, again, that's the state mandated. We, of course, do our local amendments allowed under state law. Those are still enforceable unless superseded by the ADU state law. The example being the fire sprinklers, they explicitly call that out. So those are all still applicable. for kind of the San Andreas fault, that is still under state law. You can't do a residence or a building for human habitation within X feet of an active fault trace. That law still applies. So that part is covered. And again, we can do site-specific evaluations. So if somebody does propose it on the San Andreas fault, staff can do a site-specific go, no matter what you do, you can't build anything that's safe. No, you can't build there. We can do the site-specific analysis, but we can't do it's banned everywhere type of analysis. And that's what the state's really focused on. So yes, all those building codes, fire code, all still apply.
And let's just take the example of someone who proposes something on the San Andreas fault. If you're then negotiating that, you're outside of the 60-day requirement for turning around that permit, right?
We would, if it's coming down to that, we would just have to deny it for fire life safety reasons and have a letter, but then we would just say it's denied, you have to resubmit for us to meet the 60-day timelines. Or we would have to have the developer or property owner agree to toll the bell and basically stop the bell until that issue is addressed. And then it would restart upon our mutual agreement.
What you're saying makes sense, but I don't know if that's in here. And I very much share Mr. Batra's concerns about the other things that have to still be applied. Sorry to interrupt. Anything more? Commissioner Chard.
Nothing. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Run.
Yeah, so I guess on the max size that we currently have of 1,200 to 1,500, I mean, I think one reason we have that is as an incentive to have the larger setbacks, and I understand that we're no longer going to be able to have that aspect. I believe that we also wanted to have larger ADUs as being a more suitable housing for larger families, just having more bedrooms in the ADUs. And Doug mentioned helping our housing element numbers. And then on top of all that, I mean, it's something that property owners currently have, and so I'm reticent to, sort of take something away there. So I guess all that being said, I mean, I think I would probably prefer to increase, I guess, the 1,000 square foot limit to 1,200. I mean, you brought up the option of just repealing and defaulting to state law. That sounds intriguing. What would that mean? Like would that mean we would delete all of this? And what would we lose if we did that? Because I mean, basically it seems like we're getting so little control here, right?
So where that would come in is just defaulting to state law. We would repeal our existing, not really have anything in our ordinance. We would have handouts that say we default to state law and here's the standards. And those standards are the 4-foot side and rear, up to 1,200 square feet with the height limitations that we do have in our code. Those are state law. And then the parking. That's it. So none of the LRV requirements would apply, the landscaping, and this is again for the ADUs above 800. So it would just take that 800 exemption where you can do basically any design, whatever, under 800, it would make it 1,200. And that would be it.
Yeah, I mean, that's intriguing just to simplify this whole thing, and just since we do have so little control already.
Aware of one other jurisdiction in the Bay Area currently that did that. Hayward has done that, where they've just, it's too much. We're repealing it and we default to state law. That's, as of right now, the only jurisdiction I'm aware of that has actively done that, where they had one and repealed it.
Yeah. Okay, I'll leave it at intriguing. I guess I maybe don't want to recommend that, but I think I probably personally would recommend increasing the 1,000 to 1,200. Yeah, and on the JADU address requirement, I think I'd be in favor of not requiring that. I maybe a little bit confused on the options of whether it has an external door or not, and maybe we'd need to make a different decision on for one versus the other. The rental requirement, it seems like a big disincentive to me. I mean, if we could reasonably not have that and expect not to get it immediately returned by HCD, I'd like to try that, I guess. And then on the safety standards, I think you mentioned that you would review your ability to retain some of the safety standards, so that sounds good to me. I think that's it.
I have the fortune, good or bad, of being a retired attorney. So I really urge you to draft this more carefully so it says what you want to say. The and/or is meaningless in most instances. You basically are talking about an application for this or for that. And sometimes you want to say whether it's for a ADU or a JADU, but that's an or, not an and or. If somebody wants to do both, they have to comply with both. You just have to write the rule not to do everything for everybody. So that bothers me. Secondly, in that context, I'll stick with the slash, my comments on slashes, and go back to the indemnity section. You have that permittee / applicant. Think about what it is. It's basically, you want the applicant, by the time they're a permittee, you sure as hell should have worked this out if it's a large project. So every time you put a slash, think of Linda and my 8th grade English teacher. And think about what it is you really mean to say, please. Secondly, it bothers me immensely how many times you had to answer a question by saying, well, it's something that HCD made somebody else do, or it's their guidance or anything like that. I think it's an agency that's completely run amok. And as you know, you've got laws, then you have regulations, then you have guidance documents, then you have letters, then you have legislative history. I mean, you've got a whole range of things. And I think it's a mistake to try to draft to their, there's probably someone from HCD is going to come after me, but to try to draft to their changing what, I think we have to assume that if they're giving guidance to Hayward, for example, that it may not apply here. They may have quicksand for earthquakes, but they don't have fault lines. So I would urge you to be very careful of that in all those instances where you said that. I'm more in line with Karen on the size of an ADU. To me, 1,200 square feet is a house. I think 1,000, I have just a higher comfort level with that, especially when you start to think about fencing, setbacks, height, the fact that our topography is crazy around here. There's just no flat place. And so I think that's one thing that bothered me a great deal. Few typos, you'll figure those out in due course. I would say, and I understand the issue with the JADU. You have to live there if you're sharing the bathroom. But the reality is, if I own it and I live there, I probably could lease out my own space so that you probably wouldn't have to live there full time. You probably could go away. I mean, I don't see where the state could force you to do that. And I don't know how you could, I don't know how they could implement it. I don't know how they could regulate it. So that doesn't bother me as much as it bothers some people. The whole enforcement thing is another side of this. But anyway, let me see. I'm sorry. I'm trying to be quick here. I was bothered by all this stuff about the utility connection, and I don't see it as our role to sort of be an informant in here. I mean, if you have a checklist that you're going to give somebody when they apply, say, don't forget you got to pay fees for this and fees for that. But I wouldn't take up space and words in our regulation to do that. And I don't want to get us in the middle of somebody's, oh, well, I had to PG&E all this money. You didn't tell me. And by putting it in the rule, we kind of put ourselves in that fight. So I like to keep things clean and simple. That's my version of simple. Doing this, it's a god-awful task. And I don't know what we're going to do with the fact that the legislature is going to keep changing this time and time again. But I do think it's really important for us to get as close as we can right now. I think we want to, love and kisses to HCD as much as we possibly can. And this is a way. I'm a little confused and I didn't take the time to look at it. The way I see it, this is not part of our housing element, but it's another duty that HCD has. So it's probably a different doormat at HCD, but nonetheless, I think it's important to do this. And I definitely think it's important for us to do our own version of it. I did spend a lot of time reading the state law, and it's not a work of art. So thank you. Is there anything else you would like to add?
I did want to just follow up on a couple of the questions that I heard and going back quickly to the ministerial process without discretionary review or hearing. That is actually in the state law language. It's actually that same section that was updated earlier. So that is in there. Yes. And then going back to the multifamily mixed use. So reading up on it, it does apply to a multifamily building within a mixed use zone. So it could potentially apply, yes. To just follow up on that item. And then again, if there's any other comments or concerns, I'm happy to address anything.
Thank you. I think we'll move on to our next agenda item, which is commission, staff, subcommittee reports and recommendations. I think Sarah, our stunning new planning director, probably has a report to make.
Yes, I can start with that. If you give me one moment, I did put together some very basic slides as well. Just give it 1 second. There we go. Okay. Cool. So quick update. There's a few different things that have been happening, going on. So I just wanted to talk through them a little bit, just so people are aware. So first thing, Woodside Priory annual report. Back on January 2nd, we had sent an updated and revised report from Woodside Priory to the Planning Commission. There's a few questions, comments that came in around that. But with reviewing kind of the questions and comments, a lot of them were around things outside of, is Woodside Priory compliant, or did they do the correct thing with the annual report? So we're kind of viewing it as right now they are in compliant and they're compliant with kind of what is required for the reports. But there is one item that was brought up. I think, Nicholas, you made a great point that with the special condition 8D, which is in reference to noise monitoring and the whole thing that's on the screen, but it does say that there needs to be a subcommittee created by the Planning Commission to kind of do this work. So we recognize that we need to get up to speed with this. And so I'm bringing this up now as just kind of a general report out, because I think what will be proposed at a next Planning Commission meeting is to formally kind of approve this subcommittee, so then we can move forward with sort of our side of the work as well. So that was an update on my side with that. Another thing, Portola Terrace, the Stanford project, as some might know it, there was some things that happened the last few weeks, including a temporary construction fence that was installed. I don't know the specific date, but it was in late January. It was installed without a permit approval. And so we directed the applicant or Stanford to remove the fencing until what would be a demolition permit is approved until they get through their permit approvals to put up a temporary construction fence. So as I'm aware, the fence was completely removed today. I think most of it was removed and then they finally removed the kind of final piece. So I just want to give an update on that. In addition to that, apart from many other updates that need to be made to the webpage, we're trying to do more frequent and current updates around this project. And they are on the project website, which you see on the screen, and it will be kind of under the status updates, sort of the main page when you go to the Stanford Development Project website page. We'll put updates there. So right now we have this kind of general update. There's also an update of sort of the general process that they're in, where are they at with certain permits and reviews. So we have some of that information. Hopefully that will answer a lot of questions that have come in around this project and process. And also down the road, probably fairly soon, I think we're encouraging Stanford to come in and give a general update on their project as well. So we had, Darcy and I had just recently met with them last week, and we were thinking that would be a good thing. You know, can't require them, but we can encourage them, and they definitely would love to come and give an update to the Planning Commission about where they're at, just knowing that they are getting very close to actually starting construction. And so we thought it'd be great for them to kind of talk through anything, and then for us to give, have staff here and available for questions as well with that project. So quick thing, town council was given sort of a mid-year update by our town manager. And I wanted to sort of reiterate some of the things that were also presented at that meeting. And just as a general update to you guys. So we're headed into some mid-year budget requests, which I believe will be at town council on February 11th, next week, already next week. And as part of that request, something that's really important to us as some of our priorities is to make sure that we're getting funding to implement software to help streamline and modernize the planning, building, permitting, licensing, and code enforcement. So kind of looking at what we're doing and how are we doing permitting and how are we implementing this kind of holistic system to do that. So there had been a variety of conversations, and so we're at a point where we're pushing to get budget for that, and then we'll head full steam into implementation. So I think I'll have more updates kind of depending on what we get approval for from town council, and then can update you on kind of the work that we're doing. Other things, there are some staff vacancies, as you're aware. I'm the only full-time hired staff. And so we're still kind of in the recruitment process for that. Other things we're working on, documenting SOPs for the department, implementing changes. There's a variety of things, you know, down to the nitty-gritty to other things we're noticing. So we're really, as a group, still learning how to work together, how we're doing things, how can we improve processes. We're open ears, you know, open to suggestions. And at this point, we're doing the best we can. And I think we're all learning, but I feel like we're definitely heading in the right direction. And it's been really exciting to work with staff and just learn how we've been operating in the past, learn kind of the history behind it, but then also how do we want to move forward in the future. Other things are website updates. So I feel like there might be more of a bigger project related to this. That's why I'm saying website updates might be maybe more budget or time allocation needed for a bigger update. But we are looking at doing website updates as we can. For example, like the Stanford project, things that we really need to make sure out there to the community. And that relates to just our general communications too. I want to look at kind of how we're putting information out and making sure we're able to direct people to information that's available and don't have to have always kind of one-off questions. And we can say, hey, this is on the website, or hey, we, you know, did this announcement. So I want to get more important information out there more frequently to the community as well. Another thing we're working on is finalizing the master fee schedule update. So this thing had originally, I think, been started under the interim planning director, Steve McHarris, who's still with us and looking at finalizing that. So that's been in discussion. And then other things, last but definitely not least, are our work towards the elements. One is the safety element. We know we're continuing and hopefully kind of moving that forward. Not hopefully, we will be moving that forward. And we'll have more updates on that soon. And then the housing element, as you know, we just went through the process to submit the housing element amendment to HCD. So that's been submitted. We're in the waiting period, I guess, from them. And as an update, we did take the mixed use high density draft zoning code to ASCC. And we didn't receive any, you know, conflicting or major red flag type feedback from ASCC. They thought the mixed use high density zoning looked pretty good. In addition to maybe some minor correction around discussion around clarification about setbacks. which I think was the same comment we received from planning commission as well. So we did run that through ASCC. So again, kind of in a waiting period. So that was kind of my update that I had for current work and what we're doing right now.
Thank you. It's great to have you here. Before I go to committee reports and other commissioners, I'd like to make two subcommittee reports, one subcommittee report and one clarification. I'd like this in the minutes if possible, because it's pretty confusing, but the decennial census numbers that David mentioned earlier, and he and I have done a lot of work on this since the last meeting, are occasionally used for different purposes. And our number for the year 1970 is 4,999. It's our belief and my pretty sure experience, because I was a kid around here then, that that number included Ladera, because remember, Portola Valley was only founded in 1964. The actual number that David and I have confirmed as best we can, George Bader figured it out, and then the woman historian has confirmed that. The actual number population for 1970 was 3,961. The rest of the decennial census numbers, I'm not going to go through all of them, but 1980 was 3,939. And then we kind of plopped along with a couple of % increase. So altering that number is consistent with the general growth pattern of the town. And I'd like that in the minutes, Sarah, just because it gets lost and it's a little frustrating. And then public comment, I'll speak as the chair of the subcommittee that Doug and I were on for the policy and planning document. That's under, I guess we'll call it staff and legal review. It's my intention to get it on our meeting, our first meeting in March, which I expect will be our next meeting, but I don't know for certainty, and move that forward. So that's the status of that. It hasn't been lost anywhere. It's just hasn't been everybody's top priority, I guess. That's all I have to say. Other commissioner reports? No. Moving on to the next agenda item, number 5, enclosed in your packet are the minutes from the January 7th meeting. Do we have any comments? Corrections, amendments?
I just noticed, says Brothers nominated Commissioner Krasinski for Vice Chair, Commissioner Morse accepted. I think it should be Commissioner Krasinski accepted. And then the second was by Commissioner.
Any other comments? Do I need a motion to have the minutes approved as amended?
Do we need to take public comment?
We have been taking.
We don't have to on the minutes.
No.
I recommend taking public comment on the minutes.
Okay. Is there any public comment on the minutes of our January 7th meeting? Please raise your hand. Seeing no hands, I will entertain a motion.
So moved.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, minutes are approved as corrected. Do I need a motion to adjourn? Meeting is adjourned at 9:01 p.m. Thank you, and thank you all for the public for sticking with us.